Hope you're doing good. Engineering teams often have rules that everyone in the team must follow. These are enforced during code review and on other occasions. And these may also be tied into promotions, such as denying a promotion to someone saying that he doesn't write good code. This is doing it wrong. Engineering teams should have guidelines, not rules. What's the difference between a rule and a guideline? A rule says you can't travel outside the country without a passport. You have to follow it. A guideline is only a default. It tells you what you should do by default. There will always be exceptional situations where you can break the guideline, and doing so is encouraged. So if you have a coding guidelines document, at the top it should say in big red text, these are not rules, these are only guidelines. They are not applicable 100% of the time. If you are in a situation where it is not, and you have thought through the pros and cons carefully, and you still think that you should violate the guideline, go ahead. Every document should have that. And let's kind of discuss this with a few examples. In Future Cam, my image processing startup, I so we keep a certain number of photos in memory. So we keep capturing photos one after another, but there's a limit because more than 7, the iPhone will run out of memory, at least some models. So we have this code in the capture path. Every time we capture a photo, we check the number of photos, and if it is greater than 7, you remove the first one. Now, this is an inline constant. Some people may say, no, no, that's very bad. You'll be punished for this. They'll suggest you write it this way. Let photo limit equal to 7. But this code is not any clearer, especially since the original code already has a comment. It doesn't need to be improved further, right? So these guidelines are suggestions. They say if you do this, if you have this problem, you can use the solution. But if you don't have the problem, it would be stupid to go for the solution. So this is one example. Let's take a second example. Let's have a Java class that has a getAge. Now, oops, sorry for this. Some people will say you need to have documentation, and some companies' style guides, including some of the best companies at Google, say that you should have documentation. This is Google's rules. So people write this. And in code reviews, people often point out if you try to commit this code, saying, hey, there isn't documentation, please add something. So people write this stupid documentation. Does this clarify anything? Of course, it will return the person's age. It will not return the person's name, right? The name of the function itself, getAge, tells you what it returns. This is dumb documentation written by unthinking engineers. And even the smartest people in the world can be dumb. This happens because of a mentality that these are rules, we need to follow them. Let's take another example. Suppose you have a person class like this. It has a getter and a setter and a, sorry, this should be private, and a private variable for the age. Is this good design? People would say yes. Suppose someone instead wrote this code. People will say, hey, this is not good. You're not supposed to have public member variables. And let's assume this is not an API. You have control of all the code that uses it. It's not an external API. It's not an internal API or an SDK. It's just a class internal to your program within your team. Actually, this is not anymore encapsulated because encapsulation means restricting what values you can set. So you can, even with this, you can say %.set age -3, which is invalid, but it accepts it. If you're doing something smart here, like calculating it dynamically based on the date of birth by subtracting from today's date or subtracting today's date from the date of birth, then it makes sense. But this is just boilerplate, it doesn't add value. In fact, this insightful article in Java in InfoWorld says that getter and setter methods are evil, right? Unless you are building an API, be it an internal or an external API where you can't modify the code that uses your class or interface, don't write it. I'll put a link to this in the description. Don't write these mindless accessors. Write this, and IDEs will let you encapsulate a field anytime. You can right click this in Eclipse or something and select refactor encapsulate field, and it will automatically rewrite the code this way. So you don't need to write it this way in order to keep it more extensible. It's just boilerplate. It makes the code hard to read. This is why Java is often mocked. Java is a beautiful, perfectly good language. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is in the culture of some of the people who use it who are into mindless rules like these. So don't have rules in your engineering team, have guidelines. Having rules will also drive away intelligent people who find their autonomy impinged by rules. And no smart engineer wants to follow rules that don't make sense or when they don't make sense, which is actually guidelines. So have guidelines, not rules.